What you're looking at is the archaeological dig site of the structural remains of the two-story stone house that was built by George Fairbanks and the Bogastowe farmers back in 1657. We started looking for this site back in 2005. It took about 3 years to find it. And in 2008, I was about 90% certain I had found the site using the maps and what documentation has survived the last 3.5 centuries. And so we spoke with the property owners, John and Sylvia Constable, about ending off a bus tour down here that was being put on by the Millis Historical Society of the 9 different home sites of the Bogastowe farmers west of the river, and end off the bus tour down here. Well, the day before the event, I came down to erect a sign that was to be a replica of a sign that had been put up at around 1903. We don't know where that sign was, but we did create a replica of it. And in the process, as I was digging the post holes for the sign, I came up out of the ground with physical evidence of the fort. So I went from being about 90% certain that that was the site of the fort to 100% certain in one fell swoop. I came up out of the ground with wrought iron nails and brick fragments and charcoal. So I knew we had something. This is the first stone we unearthed that was actually part of the structural remains. We had, after we knew that we were on the site, I went around with the iron soil probe in the manner of Roland Robbins back in the 1950s to find out, to get the stone strikes, because we knew it was a stone structure. And the strikes indicated that I had a wall here. So several test holes along this line were very telling, but this stone here was particularly interesting because it's a beautiful, nice big old flag stone with a 90-degree angle on both sides, all 4 sides actually. And this was the first one that we uncovered when basically the first place we were able to see that we were definitely on the fort, and we were just going to apply the biased digging technique. In other words, go from what you know. We knew that it would proceed this way, so basically we just opened up the entire east-west running north wall, and when we get down to the end, it was a little difficult. We didn't know. It was hard to determine which direction the side walls ran. We didn't see evidence. I mean, all we had over there was, as you can see, those tennis ball sized field stones, which is the only remaining evidence of the west wall. And we weren't picking up anything over here coming north. And the same thing was happening down here over the cellar wall, the corner of the northeast corner of the cellar. There was, of course, that's so far down. I wasn't picking anything up with the soil probe. Basically, we initially thought that perhaps the wall ended here, but that was a lot shorter than what Morse has indicated. He said 65, 70 feet long this structure was, but it sure wasn't from here to there. Of course, once we found the cellar and the outside corner of the cellar over there, you know, the length extended another 15 feet. But we had the same issue over here. We didn't know which direction the sidewall went. This stone here, I think, was the first stone we found along this partition, or what actually turned out to be the west wall of the cellar. We found it, and then I think Charlie, my son, and actually my wife, they were working over here, and they found this and then this. And it wasn't long before we realized that we had several rocks right next to each other that were probably the top course of a wall, which was very exciting. And so shortly thereafter we proceeded to open up all of them. But before we finished, before we got up to the, you know, the stone of the first unit that we had opened, exposing the top of the whole west wall of the cellar, we did some investigating down in here and over there on the west, on the east wall of the cellar. And I recall it was the 4th of July. My son Charlie was working here, and I was working over there, and we both discovered evidence of walls, new undiscovered walls up to that point the same day. He found this wall, and I was over there, and I found that wall right on the same day. And we were opening this wall because we could see here the courses just went down, down, down. We weren't really sure what was going on here, but this is why we went down here, and this is basically why this wall was discovered. The only reason I chose to go down over there, and as you can see, the top course of that east cellar wall is nearly 4 feet below grade. Typically, you know, an investigator is going to stop unless, you know, they have clear evidence that there's something down there. The only evidence I had that there might be something there was that the earth was just digging like butter. It seemed clear to me that it had been dug before. I mean, I'm an old Title V inspector from years back, and I can pretty much tell when earth has been dug before I've gotten there. And this earth seemed like it had already been dug. So I just kept going down. And sure enough, about 3.5, 4 feet down, I picked up the face side of these stones that make up the east wall of the cellar. And man, we had found 2 separate walls of the cellar on the same day. And we didn't know that there were cellar walls. All we knew was they were stone walls. The first unit that we opened up that was actually within the confines of the cellar walls, we exposed a bunch of rubble, or small stone fill, if you will, that we didn't really know what to think. At first I thought it might have been a wellhead, you know, of a well that had been filled in after it was abandoned, which is typically what they do. And it was kind of exciting because, you know, abandoned wells is where you will find all kinds of interesting artifacts. And so it was pretty exciting. Until we started opening up surrounding units around it to give it some context and to find the outer walls of it, all of the units presented with the exact same rubble. And so we had like a 9 meter square that had just this rubble fill. And you can tell, not only because of the fact that it was, you know, brick fragments and fragments of this type of stone, which are not indigenous to the field, and some field stones, but in between all these rocks there were air voids and whatnot, where you can tell right away that it's been filled. It's a hole that's been filled. And it wasn't long after that that we figured we were probably in a cellar. We didn't know how far down it was going to go, but it was going to be fun to find out. Once we opened up the cellar completely, there was a good amount of discussion about the possibility of it actually being a later addition. We really were never able to figure that out on our own. If you look over here and look how these stones are intermingled, you get crossed this way, they're crisscrossed as they came up with the wall, which makes for a beautiful corner between this wall and this wall. Although this wall, this east-west running north wall, does not go down this deep. It only goes down this deep underneath this partition wall. The cellar wall starts flush with this intermingled section of stones here and goes out this way, all the way out, and stops. And in it, inside of it, this wall here starts flush of it. Again, there's no intermingling of the stones, which is curious because, you know, why, if they were going to do it here, they were going to build such a beautiful stone wall here, or corner rather, why not do it the same way here? So this was an indication that perhaps it was a different period of construction, but we didn't know. And, you know, it just came out the same way and terminated flush with this wall right here. Again, no intermingling of stones at the corner, and the same thing here. Also, if you'll notice, these rocks, they come out right at the center of this 21-foot wall. We had a feeling that this was something. When you get down 4 feet and you see rocks like this, what was on top of it was just, you know, fill. And so once I saw these that were embedded right in the silty clay, and this one here next to it, and I noticed that they were right smack dab in the middle of this east cellar wall, I looked up and I said to Charlie, take a look at this. What do you want to bet there's a third one right here? Before I opened it, the unit had ended was here. You have to understand, this was an earth wall right here. So I had these two, but this is how it works. You know, you pick up clues, and I had a feeling there was a third one coming out here. And sure enough, when we opened up this unit and came down and found this and this, we knew that there was some sort of a median. They represented some sort of median axis support for the center of the cellar. Planks probably coming across like this and being supported here and again like that. And so that was interesting and helpful when we tried to determine exactly what was going on here. The unit that was open here was opened by Paul Hogan of Medfield, one of our volunteers, pretty hard worker. And he happened to notice when he was exposing the east face of this west wall, a stain coming down at a 45-degree angle right here, before this stone here was exposed. He saw a stain on the rocks, and he brought it to my attention, and we decided that it was probably rotting wood that had stuck to the stones. Wood that was perhaps part of a stairway of, you know, a trapdoor egress down into the cellar, which terminated at this landing stone. And this was all later confirmed by Tad Baker of Salem State College, who is really quite the authority. And so that was important and very interesting. At one point, with this absence of rocks here, we thought perhaps that there was like a bulkhead walk-in to the cellar. And so we opened that unit there, but as we got down, maybe once we got down like 1.5 feet below grade, we could see that we were just in virgin earth and hard pan, and obviously earth that had not been dug before. And so we sort of abandoned that theory probably just several rocks that had been knocked out as wall stones, but somehow when they robbed what stones they did rob to use elsewhere around the property, this was probably one of the wall stones, and this one here also. But if you'll notice, the interior of all these stone walls are made up of faced stones. All of the stones along the wall have been faced. They've been chiseled and hacked so that it would be a flat surface. And when you put them all together, it makes for a very nice wall. And that's the case with all four walls. The outside of the wall was, just natural, predominantly like bullet shaped. They had no reason to face off both sides of the stone because there's no cellar over here. This is basically the top course of the cellar wall, as this would be floor level here. And so only one side of the stones were faced off, and whether they were faced off on site or whether they were faced off where they quarried these stones from, it's hard to say. I don't think these stones came out of this field, because we've sunk test units all over this field, and this type of stone that makes up the entire stone structure, not to mention the fireplace and all of the walls, just do not present themselves in this field. They don't seem to be indigenous to this field. Morse might be correct when he said they were actually quarried and brought in from about a mile north. Well, either way, they don't seem to have been indigenous to this field. This is kind of a close-up of the east face of the cellar's west wall. Look at the beautiful stonework here by these guys from the mid-17th century. Walls don't get any straighter than this, by the way. Kind of in the shadow, so it's a little difficult to see. Let's see if I can pick up a brighter section and zero in a little bit. The stones are beautifully interlaid. Angles of these stones almost fit together like Legos. Very, very sturdy. The next feature that we discovered was the dual fireplace. Of course, as we were exposing the north wall, to give it context, you try to expose the edges of it. Of course, there was no edge here. We just kept finding stones, and although these appear to be randomly smattered stones, these are not. These were placed by design, and so were these. And so we knew we had another feature here. We didn't know what it was. None of this was completely open at the time. But eventually we exposed this beautiful dual fireplace. And we knew it as such because we've got fire damaged rock here with water stones in between a second fireplace with fire damaged rocks over there. You get some of these beautiful hearth stones right here. I'm amazed that they've survived the 3 centuries of plowing. And then these hearth stones here, and there's enough surviving that we're going to be able to put this together on a drafting board, and we're going to be able to show you exactly what this fireplace looked like for the most part. This was the larger fireplace, because here's the corner of the pit of this fireplace. The corner of the pit of this other fireplace is here. So this is, I think, like 8 feet across, and this one was more like 6 feet across. And it really is a wonderful example of mid-17th century you know, colonial American vernacular architecture with the, you know, in the hall and parlor arrangement and the centralized chimney placement. It's just, it's right out of these books of early colonial architecture. It's a wonderful example. According to Morse, who wrote the history of Sherburne and Holliston, this structure was entered from the south end. Now, I'm not sure I'd call the south wall the end of the structure, but it was entered from the south. And this would have been where you would enter the structure. And Tad Baker confirms this. We would come in, and there would be probably a brick partition here with a door leading into the hall area. And over here there would probably be another brick partition with a door leading into the parlor area. And directly in front of you would have been the stairway to the second floor, which was probably like this. You know, you would walk straight ahead and begin to go up the stairs here, and as they turned, you would be walking up the stairs right here. The supporting members of the stairs tying right into the bricks of the fireplace. And it wasn't very wide, and the supporting members of the staircase were probably actually part and parcel of the stones that made up the fireplace. And so if one thing moved, the other thing moved. Hunter, the caretaker of Millbourne Farm right now, he's been very, very helpful, telling us all about how it's so clayey and wet on the upland of the farm, and anytime we need something, Marshall he's a peach. He helps us out no matter what we need. You think of anything else?
Know that you're going to cry when I bury you. We fill this in, but that won't be for a while.
That's right. That's right.
No, that's...
So anyway, the parlor was where most of the living was done. You know, the evenings, cooking, most everything of everyday life was done in this room. Traditionally, the parlor room was where the family would meet, maybe have friends over after Sunday sermon, and you know, they would dress up and just sit and relax and maybe smoke a pipe and relax in this room. But that's not exactly what this room was used for by these guys. These stones here that appear to be just large field stones that form this 3-foot square formation apparently are the base of what was known as a bloomery. A bloomery was a very early form of iron making. Typically that's the form they would use out in the early colonies out in the wilderness. When they wanted to make wrought iron, they would create a bloomery and make wrought iron from local bog ore. Of course, we didn't know what these stones were when we first exposed them. I mean, when you can expose a field stone and you know, in the middle of a field, it's not going to mean anything. But when we found two right next to each other, and then a third and a fourth, and we cleared around to give it some context, and we could see that it did indeed form almost like a 3-foot square or 3.5 by 3 square formation. And along the south side and the east side, going down 3 feet, 3.5 feet below grade, was slag and early nails by the hundreds and miscellaneous iron of all sorts. What we later learned to be was the debris pit of this bloomery, and it's one of the very telltale signs of a bloomery. And so we knew that a small-scale iron manufacturing operation was going on here. We didn't know, I didn't know exactly what type at first. In fact, we sat on this slag for about a year before we researched it in earnest. The west wall, which as you can see doesn't really seem to be much other than these tennis ball sized field stones, it's basically all the evidence we have of the west wall. So it makes the structure actually only about 45 feet long when you're talking about, you know, stone footings. This unit here, where there don't appear to be any stones, was basically the first unit that was opened up along the line of this west wall. And I have to be frankly honest, and when I got down to the level of these stones, I didn't know what they were. I didn't recognize them as a feature. So I had removed 4 or 5 of them, you know, in my efforts to get down to the next level, probably the 20-centimeter level, because they did not appear to be obvious features. And I got down there and we found some charcoal that sort of started here and went across like this, which kind of indicated that perhaps there was a bearing member, a wooden bearing member here, which burnt and fell in. But the stones, I think, provide us with a very interesting insight into the way these guys thought with respect to the frost line and how far down they needed to go to not worry about frost heaves. This is as far down as wall evidence goes. It's not that far down. It looks like they just put these stones here. They went around and collected these stones, all of roughly the same size, and probably just hand tamped them into place as hard as they could, and then laid the stones of the type that you see along the north wall on top. Now I say that because these same stones exist underneath that north wall. And so we're thinking that's what they did. Before I get too far along, I just wanted to, now that I'm looking at these, the bricks, these bricks right here along the north side of the bloomery base are evidence that there was a brick lining on the outside of the bloomery. It was probably a brick lining on the inside and the outside with sand or some sort of other earth fill in between as insulation for the very hot temperatures that would be reached to smelt the iron ore inside this thing. The other interesting feature of this section is this rock here. We don't know what this is. This could have been any number of things, from a threshold to a door leading out right here to a lintel that was over the door, or even a mantelpiece that was originally over the fireplace. It's hard to say what this is, but it's a very interesting and large stone. When we had Tad Baker down here about 2 weeks ago, I asked him in particular about this feature here, which we haven't spoken of yet. This line of bricks that are just one brick right after the other, and it's kind of an unusual formation. We've got 2 courses of them, and they're just lying there. Nobody among our volunteers really had any idea of what this was. And so, we'd gone back and forth a good amount. But Tad Baker came down a couple weeks ago and he saw it. He said, these bricks are the remains of a brick fire back that came up like this. These stones here are the heart stones of a very primitive fireplace. And so that was a big revelation to us. We didn't have a clue that this was a fireplace, and this was perhaps an earlier structure. He asked me about the artifacts that we've been unearthing, in particular the tobacco pipe evidence. And what I told him indicated to him and confirmed with him that, okay, you're finding the older artifacts out in the vicinity of this more primitive structure. He said that jives. The other aspect of the fireplace that we haven't really discussed is the beehive oven. There probably would have been a beehive oven right here, because you're in the hall area, the larger of the 2 areas. The beehive oven would have been right here next to this fireplace, getting heat from this fireplace and being hooked into the same smoke conveyance. So this is where the beehive oven would have been. And you can see charcoal at the floor level. This is the lowest level of any sort of human inhabitant evidence. The level of charcoal was probably about 2 inches thick, 1.5 to 2 inches thick, all throughout the interior of this section. We found charcoal evidence of tongue and groove planking, which was important. On top of the layer of charcoal were most of the brick fragments that we've unearthed. The bricks, we don't have too many whole bricks, but the brick, I took a whole brick and I brought it over to the Dwight Derby house to compare it to the bricks over in the partitions of the Dwight Derby house in Medfield. And not only was the color of the brick exactly the same, but the length and width and the thickness of the bricks were also exactly the same. So there's an excellent chance that the bricks of the Dwight Derby house and the bricks of this house came from the same clay pit perhaps. And it also tells us that the floorboards burned first. We don't believe that the entire structure burned. We have a line on the dismantling of this structure, but we haven't finished our research there. But we believe, obviously, there was a fire because there's charcoal. We think the floorboards burnt, and the clay bricks inside the structure fell, and that explains the bricks on top of the charcoal. Now, among the brick remains, we found also daubing from wattle and daub system in the wall for insulation. Tad Baker confirmed the identification of the daubing. We suspected it, but he confirmed it. And then he also confirmed what we didn't know was bits of mortar, probably ancient lime mortar, which we found way below the organic fraction of the soil, which is probably the only reason they still survived. And that was important. The other thing we talked about was the roof. We didn't know what kind of roof this structure had. No one had ever talked about that. There was basically 3 types of roof that it could have been back then. Slate, clapboard, or thatched. After we did quite a fair amount of digging, we found no evidence of slate that would have been roofing slate. Plus, Tad said you probably wouldn't see a slate roof out here on a structure that was this early. It's probably, that sort of roof was typically used on the, the more finer houses near the coast. So those 2 things pretty much ruled out a slate roof. We said, okay, well, it could be thatched, but who would put a thatched roof on a bloomery? Who in their right mind would put a thatched roof on top of a bloomery? It made no sense. So before we even got done talking about it, we figured we knew what kind of roof it had. It was a clapboard roof. Makes perfect sense. We found many, many nails of about 1.5 inches long, which would be typically the size nail that you would nail clapboard down. None of these nails were banged over, as you might do if the point of a nail comes into a living structure. You want to bang it over so nobody catches themselves. All these nails were none of them have been crimped over, so you wouldn't have to worry about them for a roof anyway. So we believe that this was a clapboard roof. There's a screen, one of them, that we screened all of the earth that was pulled out of that site, except for the stones that we threw out of the cellar onto that pile next to the cellar. Tons and tons of earth were screened with this screen, and some very amazing artifacts were found. Boy, that's when history comes alive, when you see the light green patina of a coin that predates 1700, or the peace pipe pendant, or all the different things we found there. The glazed pottery, the nails, window glass, you name it. We all took it off that screen, or the other one that is on the other side of the site. That's where history comes alive.